arguments that they're using. This is what you're going to see from every single right-wing movement in the future or center-right movement in the future that does not explicitly identify as nationalist or alt-right. The arguments that they're making about why capitalism just is, that's science, why we're not promoting racism or sexism, but we are very interested in some extremely antiquated ideas about scientific differences, quote unquote, right? So what you're seeing in these arguments, and I'm just going to bring in two other things because there's a lot to cover here and I can kind of get lost in the weeds. A basic difference, I would say, between left and right is the difference between historicizing and naturalizing. If you're on the left, broadly speaking, you look at things and you say, what are the historical, material reasons why that is happening? If you're on the right, you say that is what it is. Now, paradoxically, this is actually a reason why right now there's a lot of conflict between people who are more socialistic and people who are more like woke, quote unquote. Because their moral dimension is better. Look, America is a racist society is correct. Acknowledging that truth versus denying that truth is a major difference. No question. However, if you read Adolph Reed, who's one of my intellectual heroes, I really hope everybody is reading him, he will tell you why racism and white supremacy is a multi-generational project in America that depends on economic conditions, that manifests in different geographies, that is inseparable for how we produce and do capitalism. And actually, it might become separable, right? Whereas some people who have a woke discourse, it just is. It's the religious foundation of America. There's no difference between any different historical periods. It's just this moral block statement. Does that make sense? So some of these critiques can get really subtle, and that's actually what started to occur to me with the IDW and dealing with the right, because these guys were exploiting a lot of weaknesses. They were coming in and they were seeing people, you know, look, if your pop culture diet, and let's say you're an alienated young man, which is the primary audience for these guys. That's just market demographics. That's not a moral statement. I did some brand work. This is just like you're looking at your demos. You're alienated. You don't feel powerful. You probably have a lot of actually very valid complaints in your life. You flip open, say, some mediocre, bougie website that you think is the left, and what do you have? Seinfeld's actually problematic, and you suck, and shut the fuck up, and this is a problem, and that's a problem, and this is this, and da 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 da. And then Jordan Peterson comes along and goes, no, actually, you're great, and you should have a government-provided wife to massage you.
Is the very first episode of the Give Them an Argument podcast. I'm your host, Ben Burgess, and roaming somewhere in the chat is David Feldman, who is very nicely doing sound editing for the YouTube version, for the podcast version that people will eventually be hearing for this. Should also shout out to Forrest from TMBS, who's doing the video editing for YouTube, and Cole James Cash, who provided intro music that, with any luck, if the timing comes together right, you're going to be hearing when people download this as a podcast or watch it on YouTube. The voice that you just heard, of course, was our departed brother, Michael Brooks, from his Mill Series lecture at Lafayette College. And I wanted to start out with that for a couple reasons. So one of them is just that it seemed right to me that be the first voice that you ever heard on this podcast, since it certainly wouldn't be happening if not for him. Both because months ago he told me that I should think about doing something like this, which says a lot about the man, that that he was a very ambitious person, but he was competing against past versions of himself. He was equally ambitious on behalf of his friends and comrades, and striving to enact the political project that he cared about so deeply. And also because I think that the way he sets things up in that clip is really good. I mean, the whole thing is great. Counting all the Q&A, it's like 2.5 hours. I'm obviously not going to play that here, but everybody should look that up, the Mill Series lecture, and watch it. The way that he handles questions from people who are like, you know, college Democrat kind of people who are asking kind of annoying questions. But he could dismiss, he could grandstand, he could use his considerable rhetorical ability to just make them feel silly, but he doesn't do that. There's maybe a little moment of it when somebody asks him a ridiculous question about, you know, whether he was like a self-hating Jew for criticizing Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, and there's a little bit of snark at the beginning, justifiably, I thought, before he goes into his real answer. But even in that real answer, you can tell that he's always trying to think about what framing is going to make sense to the students, how he can not just score points with people who already like him, but he can intersect with their worldview. He can give them an argument that would actually mean something to them. And obviously he's one of the most gifted, political communicators that we've had on the left in a very long time, which is one of many reasons the loss is irreplaceable. But another reason that I wanted to start out with that clip was because the analysis itself is really sharp, and it's going to directly tie into the first thing that I'm going to talk about today. So the first guest in just a couple of minutes is going to be Matt Leck, who, that should be a name that if you watched the Michael Brooks show, and What's Wrong with You, if you never have, sorry, it'll be a wonderful new discovery if you never have. And when you do, you'll hear Michael say, super producer Matt Leck, about 10,000 times. See, James in the chat says he never has. You should. It's great. Like so much gold in there. But what I want to talk about with Matt has to do with some of the issues going around right now about free speech and what's sometimes called cancel culture, as it impacts the very group of people that Michael is talking about in that clip, the so-called intellectual dark web. So this is a group of people that includes Jordan Peterson, who Michael was doing this kind of Kermit the Frog impression of earlier, which is always fantastic, and Ben Shapiro, who's much more of a conventional conservative. He's also like 4 feet tall and has a really distinctive speaking pattern, and Dave Rubin, who is just kind of adult, no reason to be dishonest about that. Sam Harris, who's less doltish than Rubin, is a neuroscientist, but falls into the same lazy habits of thought, the same absurd arguments as the rest of these guys do. And finally, last but not least, the Weinstein brothers, Brett and Eric. And I just want to stay on Michael for a minute because there's a passage from his book Against the Web, which again I really strongly recommend that everybody read. It'll take you an afternoon. It's a short book. It's a fast read, but it's packed with like really interesting insight and analysis. No, not to be confused with Harvey and Bob Weinstein. These are different Weinstein brothers. And in that book, there's a section where he starts talking about Quillette, and in general, that side of the culture war. So here's what he says. Above and beyond everything else that's wrong with this kind of behavior, and what he's talking about is, what's sometimes called cancel culture, some of the more excessive antics of certain kinds of student activists who don't have a good political strategy. He says it's an ongoing gift to our political enemies. Claire Lehman's magazine Quillette has printed nonsense about IQ that borders on a contemporary version of phrenology, the art and science of using skull measurement to determine personality traits and intelligence. It's published ridiculous capitalist apologetics, including a crude article by an Amazon warehouse worker defending the company's disgusting labor practices. It's also published a few good articles by leftists, like he mentions a couple, including me and our friend and comrade Mac McManus, who actually did a really interesting interview with Michael about his book for the Zero Books channel. You should also check that out. Who make a practice of going into enemy territory to argue for leftist ideas. Though I back them in their incursions, we should be crystal clear about Quillette's reactionary editorial line. But here is the key passage. Here's the thing, he says. Quillette and similar magazines don't attract attention to their toxic material because there's a massive pre-existing audience for their worst takes. Rather, they generate their readership by publishing a never-ending stream of, oh my God, look at these leftists being crazy articles. Does the right exaggerate and lie about these things? Sometimes. But these things really do happen from time to time as well, and when they do, they cause real problems. Entire careers are built on this nonsense. We wouldn't have ever heard of Brett Weinstein if not for what happened at Evergreen College. Far too much ink and podcast hours have been spent laboriously re-reviewing his version of the Evergreen drama, without attempting to relitigate the he said, she said of that situation this far out. I will say that I suspect my friend and editor, Doug Lane, was correct to ask whether an increasingly corporatized administration was playing divide and conquer by deflecting student anger away from real decision makers and onto a professor who was arrogant and tone deaf enough about the students' legitimate anger and activism to make for an easy target. The way that activists turn their attention to this ridiculous and thoroughly unimpressive person, who nonetheless has connections, turned him into a cause celeb for the right. Whatever else is true about all this, what matters most is that Brett and his brother Eric Weinstein are here with us now, pushing the right-wing classical liberal problem of the IDW. In a world where the left was just a little better at acting strategically, Brett may well still be teaching biology at a nice hippie liberal arts college, while Eric quietly did whatever it was he did for billionaire ghoul Peter Thiel. Doug Lane, who he mentioned in there, by the way, very thoughtfully after Michael passed, sent me this bottle of very nice, very smooth bourbon. Enjoying some of that right now while I record the episode. The Glenn Beck book, I will tell you about later in the episode. But I really like the way he sets things up there. And I am going to bring in Matt Leck now.